Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We haven't really gone to town on this yet, but I did tease you with it on Friday and do the reveal a moment ago. It was presented by that nice fellow who does Countdown, who used to be on The Apprentice. What's his name? Nick Hewer. That's probably why it costs so much money. But Liam Fox's Department for International Trade did a 6-part podcast series called Local to Global, designed to encourage British firms to export after Brexit using a blend of personal stories and memorable moments. And anyway, 8,398 people downloaded it. That's not even a guarantee they've listened to it, is it? 8,398 people, and it cost £107,000. So that works out at roughly £12.70 per download. Kind of quite a nice little emblem for Brexit, actually. And it is to Brexit we now turn our attention. And I've got a bit of an odd one for you today. At 21 minutes after 11, you'll know, if you're kind enough to listen to the programme, that on a sort of slightly more than irregular basis, you'll know, first of all, the obligatory pat myself on the back moment where we've called everything correctly until the end of last year. But you'll also know, specifically with Ireland, actually, with reference to Ireland, and just not understanding how, once the red lines met the Good Friday Agreement, things could shake down any differently from how they are shaking down. Telegraph reports this morning that this odd mission of Geoffrey Cox's to somehow get them to turn the backstop into something that is not a backstop anymore has already failed. Everywhere else in the world, or certainly in the parts of the world that the European Union is relevant to, they've been described. Even I sit here sometimes thinking, well, maybe there is something to this notion that they're going to change their minds at the last minute, and the fact that every single person who's spoken publicly from a position of authority on the European Union Commission side has said the same thing. Maybe they are all going to collectively change their mind when they're confronted with the negotiating brilliance of Liam Fox or Dominic Raab or David Davis. You know, maybe. Even that's the problem. Now, this is my point. This is where today's question comes from. Because I'm not going to pull any punches on this one. I'm going all out arrogant Remainer, okay? Except, oddly, the thing I'm going to be arrogant about is the absence of arrogance. So when I say to you that even though my analysis of Brexit has been horribly right, it has always been underpinned by a hope, not a fear. This is the odd thing, I think, for people on the other side of the fence to understand. A genuine hope that we'd turn out to be wrong. Because the alternative is horrible for everybody, however you voted. And yes, it's dispiriting sometimes when people sort of think that they're scoring a point against you by pointing out that the referendum went one way and not the other. But, of course, our response to that is always, so what is it that's going to be better? And they've stopped doing that now. I don't know whether you've noticed. All we get now is, well, that might stay the same. Ha, ha, ha. That doesn't really prove anything. Things are supposed to be better after leaving than they are when we're in. And the fear of leaving with no deal, which again, outside of the ERG and the weirdly enslaved British media, everybody recognises that would be disastrous in any meaningful sense. This weekend we actually saw the American ambassador trying to flog us chlorinated chicken. It's only 6 months ago that they were telling us that all talk of chlorinated chicken was ludicrous and exaggerated and not true at all. Fast forward 6 months, American ambassador trying to flog us, trying to tell us that we shouldn't worry about chlorinated chicken, describing British agriculture as a museum piece. So yet again, something else that has turned out to be true, which was once filed under Project Fear. And of course, when the Brexiters find out that the American ambassador is American, it's going to be hell to pay. You remember how cross they were when a president actually said stuff that was true and helpful to us, but they were furious because he was foreign. Imagine how furious they're going to be when they find out that the American ambassador is talking up the destruction of British agriculture. What? No, of course they'll react the same. You're suggesting there might be a demonstrable difference between Woody Johnson, the American ambassador, and Barack Obama, which means a certain type of Brexiter is going to be naturally negative towards Barack Obama and not negative towards Woody. But what could it possibly be? You make it sound like it might be a black and white issue. But we digress, because here's the thing. Given that And it doesn't apply to everybody. There's some nastiness on social media from people who describe themselves as Remainers, who are almost poised to relish the discomfort of people who voted to leave. I am categorically not one of them, and I never will be, because I think it's very easy to have been persuaded to vote leave by some very sophisticated and unpleasant individuals. Con men, as the Danish Prime Minister called them at the weekend. We know that, don't we? Because we have to listen to them on a daily basis. So there's no schadenfreude from me if you lose your job. Quite the opposite. All you will have is my sympathy and my anger at the people who persuaded you to vote for a scenario that has seen you lose your job. But that is the existence of that little bubble in the back of my brain that interests me the most. The hope that you're wrong. With, 25 days to go, it's almost certain that we're not wrong. But, and this is where the borderline arrogance comes in. Because you genuinely want things to be better for everybody. And because if you're a Remainer, you're almost certainly motivated by concern for people who are going to be hit harder than you are. You know, this is why I always ask you that question. What's in it for the key Remainers? What do they get out of it? What does Gary Lineker get out of it? What does Tony Blair get out of it? He talks about Brexit in my podcast interview on the new series Full Disclosure. What does he get out of this, you know? What does J.K. Rowling get out of it? What does Gina Miller get out of it? What do any of these people... What does Andrew Adonis get out of it? He's already got a seat in the House of Lords. What do these people get out of their arguments and their concerns? On a personal level, nothing at all. So they must be motivated, rightly or wrongly, by concern about others. What do Rees-Mogg and Farage and people like that get out of it? Well, you can make a list. Some of the key backers of Brexit have already boasted about making a killing out of a tumbling pound. They are poised to make money out of chlorinated chicken. You know, the so-called Institute for Economic Affairs was actually set up by a chicken farmer who was outraged at being told by government or society how he could and couldn't treat his chickens. You think I'm making that up? Look it up. So, I think that because we are generally evidence-based and rational, we are more likely to be drawn towards Theresa May's withdrawal agreement than the headbangers are. So you know this analysis that we've been doing since January, since we got back after Christmas, where Theresa May, you can make sense of Theresa May and the withdrawal agreement by seeing it as something that nobody actually wants, but it's preferable to the alternatives for everybody. So you've got your ERG and your UKIP types on one side. They are terrified by the prospect of Brexit not happening. They can't really tell you why. It's all about sovereignty and control and stuff like that. But they're terrified of it not happening because then, I don't know, we might have to sit around a table with some French people, God forbid. And on the other side, you've got Remainers, who are even more terrified of no deal than they are of so-called soft Brexit. So Theresa May is frightening Remainers with the prospect of no deal, and she's frightening headbangers with the prospect of no Brexit, and the idea is that she draws them both towards the middle. Now, my analysis of Remainers and Brexiters would be that we, i.e. Remainers, are more likely to reluctantly go along with the rational choice. So that's what I want you to talk to me about today. Who do you think is more likely to back Theresa May's deal? The unicornists on the Rees-Mogg side of politics, or who are we looking at then? You're looking at moderate Labour MPs, and I'm looking at me. And I'm saying to you, as a so-called arch Remainer, someone who is utterly persuaded that what we're doing is stupid and dangerous, damaging and unnecessary, I'm putting it to you that if I was in the House of Commons right now, looking at all possible avenues, I could make a case for voting for Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. A really reluctant case. Where do you stand on it? Because remember when we opened up the phone lines and said, does anyone actually like it? And nobody rang us. Different question today. If you were in Parliament, and this is a lovely question to ask because it applies to you wherever you sit on the Brexit scale, whether you're hardcore Brexit still, or whether you're the opposite extreme or somewhere in between. What would if it was a free vote on the withdrawal agreement, what would you do and why? 0345 6060 973. A free vote, remember, so no whipping, no party politics. Utterly, this is an entirely academic, theoretical exercise, but I'm fascinated to know what you would do. Because I can just about imagine voting for it. And I'm more surprised by that than you are. They always say politics is the art of the possible, don't they? And I'm very reluctant to have this conversation, and my own position is very much a work in progress. But I can see why people who would much, much rather not leave the European Union at all might be persuaded in Parliament to vote for Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. Because it's a question of what the other lot are prepared to do. They've already made it clear they're prepared to chop off both legs in order to accrue unspecified benefits like blue passports and sovereignty. So when you look at no Brexit, no deal Brexit, and you understand, even if 10% of what the expert analysis tells us is true, the government's own analysis, remember, the government's own analysis, it's terrifying. And the fact that these people are still prepared to go ahead with it, and the fact that so many people in my profession and in the public at large will just close their eyes and go along with it because the alternative is to admit that they made a terrible mistake, means that once again Remainers are going to have to clean up the mess, which at this point in proceedings might involve voting for the withdrawal agreement. I don't know. What would you do if it was a free vote and you were in Parliament? And you need to tell me a little bit about where you came from in terms of the referendum before you tell me where you are currently residing. Gabrielle is in Muswell Hill. Gabrielle, what can you tell us?
Hi.
Hello.
Well, I'm an absolutely arch-resolute Remainer, as you do.
Yes.
As you are, sorry. And I've been following your programme with great dedication.
Thank you.
I don't have a lot of quarrel with you, James.
Okay.
But I have to say that literally in the last 24 hours,
Yes.
I have really been mulling over this question myself.
Oh,
and
good.
I think that if I
Sounds like I'm making
radio.
bespoke radio just for you and your psychodramas at the moment, Gabrielle.
Pardon?
Nothing. Carry on.
Okay. Well, yeah, I have been mulling this over, and so that's why I thought I'd answer your question, because I would definitely, very, very, very reluctantly, if I was an MP and I had a free vote for the withdrawal agreement. And my rationale is perhaps slightly more circuitous than yours.
Go on.
My concern is the... as I understand it, and you're more versed in this than I am.
Maybe.
But as I understand it, there's been a sharp increase in the membership of UKIP in the last year or so. And, you know, we've all seen the very worrying rise of the far right, sort of both in this country and across Europe.
Yeah, I just pause you there. You're right, it's gone up, but it's always a danger to look at percentages. So it's gone up by 50%, but that's only about 8,000 people.
All right. Okay. Well, that's very comforting.
Good.
Well, my concern, nonetheless, is, and perhaps I am falling somewhat prey to kind of media hysteria
Yes,
about.
maybe we all are.
Yeah. What the possible outcome would be if we, if we jack the whole thing in or whatever. However, I do at this stage feel like perhaps if we just give them the withdrawal agreement, this is the sort of the hard Brexiteers, they will kind of just leave it alone, and it will just...
Oh, bless you.
Well,
because they've done loads. They've done loads in the past to suggest that if you treat them generously and rationally, they'll respond in a generous and rational fashion. Yeah, Theresa May's written a book about how the ERG are really generous and rational when they're treated in a rational and generous fashion. So you're saying you'd go for the withdrawal agreement because you think it'll keep them happy, and if they're not happy, we'll see a rise in the far right even faster than we're seeing already.
Yeah, I actually do think that. Yeah, I do. I think there are a lot.
But I'm never going to do anything out of fear of the far right. I do the opposite. Whatever they want me to do, I do the opposite because they're fascists and you're not.
I know. Well, it's a very, very, very... I think it's a very, very tricky issue, and I can...
I've arrived in the same place but for different reasons, and you've given me a beautiful analogy while you were speaking. It just took form in my mind. And I think what we're doing, we're talking about a town is on fire, right? And in order to stop that fire spreading to the whole town, we have to pull down some buildings that aren't currently on fire.
Which is what they had to do.
Yeah, I know. That's why it's such a good analogy.
Yeah.
So you and me, when we vote for the withdrawal agreement, we're pulling down buildings that we don't want to pull down, but we recognise that if we don't pull down, the fire could spread to parts that we really don't want it to spread to.
Yeah, essentially.
In your mind, that would be far right rising. In my mind, that would be the economic impact of a no-deal Brexit. Unfortunately, I've got a horrible feeling that we cancel each other out. But we shall see. I've definitely got the question right, because the quality of Gabrielle's answer proves it. 11:40 is the time. Jonas is in Prestatyn in North Wales. Jonas, where are you coming from on this one?
Well, I was speaking to you before about Brexit on many occasions, or twice or three times or something.
Yes.
And my position hasn't changed much. It's still a disaster. But I've spoken to my MP, the really nice man, David Hanson.
Oh, yeah.
And he is, I would say he's probably struggling a bit because he's a Remainer. But his constituency voted 56% to leave.
56%.
56 to leave, yeah.
Yeah.
And but a lot of the workers and his voters here are employed in quite heavy industry like Toyota and Airbus and such like. And everybody knows they will suffer. He knows that.
Well, not everybody. I'm just going to... Sorry to be so pedantic, but not everybody, mate. There's still plenty of people blaming it on diesel.
Yeah, of course they are. But that's not their fault that they've been lied to and they believe it, is it?
That's true.
So, but he is trying to do I'm afraid to say the typical Labour thing at the moment, to placate everybody and to kind of just sitting on the fence and trying to do the best for everybody.
Yes.
And unfortunately, Theresa May's deal is the best out there. We couldn't have reached anything better.
But this is the horrible clutch that the Remainer finds herself in, isn't it? Because what you have is we would go along with it because it's nowhere near as bad as no deal, and it's better than anything else that could have been secured. But while we go along with it, the other lot... Now, hang on, I need to get this out. The other lot will insist until their dying day that we could have got a much, much better deal if only, and then you insert whatever fatuous slogan you want, if only we'd believed more, or if only we'd sent an idiot to do our negotiations instead of an expert. Do you see what I mean? So you describe a decision to back this bill based upon rational pragmatism, but the people that we are now cleaning up after will claim until their dying day that it could have gone so much better if only we'd all tapped our heels together and believed in Kansas.
Of course. And I've kind of started a little bit of trolling on Twitter, I'm afraid to say, about the Spellman amendment, which was voted through, which is a non-binding amendment that rules out a no deal. And simply saying to any MP that I'm sending a Twitter message to that the Spellman amendment, though it's not legally binding, should be treated as such because the referendum was not legally binding.
That's not trolling, you silly old sausage. That's just tweeting facts to people. That's the opposite of trying, unless you call them mean names while you were doing it, or of course, unless you're doing it 25 times a day, in which case you can expect to get yourself muted or blocked sharpish, but I sense from your tone that you're doing neither. Jonas, thank you. I'm cracking on because I want to get as many in on this. It's a horrible conclusion to arrive at because it makes everything worse, not better in one way, but it makes the biggest thing better, not worse in another. Alan is in Faversham. Alan, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I'm afraid I'm going to fly in the face of your theory a little bit.
Good.
Because,
don't apologise.
I voted Remain.
Yes.
And in the second referendum, I would still vote Remain.
Right.
But if it was a transferable vote, my second choice would be the full hard Brexit.
To teach them a lesson?
Not so much teach them a lesson, but what I think is that if we do some kind of half-hearted Brexit, we'll still have the likes of Farage and Smog telling us that it
could have been so different if only ...
It's not Brexity enough.
Yeah. And that's why the narrative of betrayal is so acute. I mean, that's similar to what we were talking about with Jonas down in Prestatyn, is this idea that I backed the withdrawal agreement in the knowledge, if I did, and I'm not sure I do, but in the knowledge that the people that I'm trying to mitigate, the people whose sabotage of my country I'm trying to undermine, would spend the rest of both our lives claiming that things could have actually gone much better if only ... And so you're saying, let's remove the if only from the table, let's put the worst case scenario there and see them wriggle out of that one.
And then, well, not so much wriggle out of it, but I think the sooner we get to that point, the sooner we can start rebuilding our relationship with Europe and start making our way back again. I think if we only go halfway, we're going to have to continue that journey the whole way, just over a much longer period of time, before we turn around and start coming back again.
Yeah, you could well be right, and of course coming back will involve massively inferior terms and conditions from a Eurosceptic point of view to the ones that we currently enjoy. Do you like my burning buildings analogy, Alan?
I do like your burning buildings.
Yeah, I do as well.
Yeah,
I think it's got legs.
I'm afraid it still doesn't sell Theresa May's deal to me, I'm afraid.
No, and I can see why, because Theresa May's deal is demonstrably worse than membership. Everybody knows that. It seems the country is now divided, regardless of how they voted in the referendum, between people who either understand or believe that, and people who... Some people don't understand it. I think the worst people in the whole of Brexit are the people who do understand that Theresa May's deal is both inferior to membership and the best available deal, but they pretend not to understand it while encouraging people to double down on their self-harm. Alan, thank you. Eric is in Cardiff. Eric, what do you reckon? No? No, Eric. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll take a break on time and come to Eric first after this. And you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC as I desperately go through my contacts looking for somebody who might talk to us about the passing of the Prodigy frontman Keith Flint. And then I sort of realise I can talk to you myself. Actually, should we give Beverly a ring, oddly? Beverly Knight knows a little bit about... she's already tweeted, I'm heartbroken, once the most innovative, fearless, ballsy bands to grace a stage, and Keith was perfection up front. If you ever saw the Prodigy live, it was close to a unique experience. Most people are probably just familiar with the Firestarter videos and stuff like that, but they were an astonishing dance act. I'd put them in that cusp of rock and roll values with dance music sensibilities, that kind of post-Screamadelica world that Primal Scream ushered in, that saw dance music and rock and roll. I mean, for a significant period of the 90s, dance music was rock and roll. There weren't any rock and rollers. The people that were living the lives that the rest of us looked at with a bizarre sense of wonder, shock and envy were essentially dance music artists, whether making music or DJing. Keith Flint sort of straddled so many different areas. His dancing was absolutely breathtaking as well. He was a performance artist if we were living in slightly more pretentious times, but that's tragic. 49 years old. Police say no suspicious circumstances. Called to concerns for the welfare of a man at an address in Brookhill in North London just after 8 o'clock this morning. Any more on that as and when it happens. We return, you will not be surprised to learn, to the choppy waters of Brexit, and we're groping around a bit in the dark today. I don't think I am actually softening. It just depends. This is the problem with opinion rather than fact. When you can read it, understand it and explain it, I was laughing. I was cooking with gas. I've enjoyed, even though it's been chronicling utterly unnecessary damage being done to my country and my countrymen and women, I enjoyed the intellectual process of trying to understand and explain stuff, which is why nobody who listens to this programme, if they'd listened with open ears and open mind, will have been surprised to see everything come down to that question of the British border in Ireland, something that we'd been explaining and predicting for over 18 months. Of course, you have to at this point acknowledge lots of people didn't believe us and possibly still don't, even though it's happened. I don't know how you break through that kind of skull. I really don't. I've tried and tried and tried and tried, and I've failed. But when I look at the so-called withdrawal agreement now, although it is obviously inferior to being in the European Union, everybody accepts that. Even Boris Johnson has expressed that view publicly. How could you possibly be arguing in favour of it? Answer, because it's not as bad as what might happen if we don't vote for it. And that, I think, has been Theresa May's plan all along. So she says to the ERG, the problem being, of course, that their position isn't rational, it's emotional. It's all about the nationality of people rather than the performance or the decency of people, the intelligence of people. Less important than the colour of a passport for these kind of politicians. So they're never going to do the rational thing, in my humble opinion, and move. Some of them will bottle it just because they're worried about their own careers, but the rump won't, because they'd have to admit they'd got everything wrong for their entire lives. And the only way they can avoid doing that is to carry on voting for a postponement of reality, which no deal provides. The tragedy is that the reality it postpones is infinitely worse than the reality that would be ushered in by giving up now and voting for the withdrawal agreement. But the reality that would be ushered in by voting for the withdrawal agreement is demonstrably and definitively inferior to the reality of remaining in the European Union. So why am I sitting here telling you I can understand why people who want to remain might vote for the withdrawal agreement? Answer, because it's better than what might happen. And that's an appalling place to have ended up in after nearly 3 years of toing and froing. Anybody who votes for the withdrawal agreement will be voting out of fear of what the other extreme might do if that withdrawal agreement is not passed. So, for analogy fans, I'm describing it as stopping a fire burning down an entire town by pulling down some buildings near the fire that aren't currently on fire, because that will stop the fire from spreading. Oh boy. 03456060973 is the number that you would be able to ring if my switchboard wasn't already full. Let me talk to Eric in Cardiff. Free up that phone line, you grab it. Eric, over to you.
Well, I'm an archetypal Remainer because I've got a degree and I did work in Germany and Belgium for a while. I mean, if I
citizen of nowhere.
Sorry?
You're a citizen of nowhere.
You said it, yeah.
Carry on.
That. I thought I'd vote for Remain again if I had an absolute free choice.
Well, it's not an option in the House of Commons. I've made you an MP, Eric. You may not have been paying attention.
Yes, if you're just talking about the House of Commons, yes. I mean, I'd vote for a deal on the grounds that the disaster is not quite as bad as a catastrophe. But,
so you'd vote for the withdrawal agreement, knowing it's worse than what you're really in favour of, because you've seen just how mad some of these people are, and you can't countenance the possibility of letting them get their hands on the steering wheel.
Right, you said it. I say the referendum was, in part at least, undemocratic and fraudulent.
In part?
The results should, well, yes. Well, okay, hold if you wish to insist, but...
doesn't matter, though. Will of the people who were conned by criminals. Yeah, that's it. That's what Britain's become. We've got to enact the will of the people who were conned by criminals. And, of course, not all the people doing the conning were actual criminals. A lot of them are just con artists, as the Danish Prime Minister explained this weekend. Circumstances in which I could swing you back, Eric, if you pardon that rather uncomfortable mental image?
I'm sorry?
Yes, exactly. Circumstances in which I could persuade you to vote against the withdrawal agreement because the glittering prize of remaining had regained its lustre.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but if I had an absolute choice, then I would vote for Remain if that was an option.
But it's a question of what's plausible and possible rather than what's ideal. And that's why I think Remainers are more likely to compromise than the lunatic fringe of Leave voters. I think Leave voters, I don't even know. What would a moderate Leave voter do? Give me a ring and tell me. I genuinely don't know. A Leave voter who recognises that no deal is an honest Leave voter who thought we'd get a Norway-y or a Switzerland-y or something-y, but knows no deal. It knows that all the analysis is correct about no deal, so you haven't fallen for that. These are the people who I feel have been most ignored. People who voted to leave, but who consider people like Farage and Rees-Mogg to be as repellent as most Remainers do. Ian is in Antwerp, in Belgium. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, just basically, I feel like I've got an opinion I haven't really heard being branded about much on the radio or on YouTube or anywhere, really.
Go on.
But if I was an MP and she had dragged down the clock as she is doing,
yes.
I'd probably end up abstaining from the vote myself. I'm a Lib Dem supporter, and I'd kind of hope they took that stance, because I couldn't really tell my children I voted for either option, really. Because they're both dreadful. One leaves us without, obviously, any sovereignty, really, as the Brexiteers keep going on about, and leaves us without any say in the world, and the other one does that and leaves us financially destroyed as well.
So we either become rule takers, not rule makers, and we sustain or we retain a degree of economic health, or we secure this meaningless notion of sovereignty, which will be diluted the minute that we sign up to anything, whether it's WTO terms or a trade agreement that insists that American can send over their filthy chicken. But there'd be economic damage, but, quote, sovereign. God, you're right, aren't you?
Yeah, I couldn't bring myself to
but one has got to be worse than the other. And your children will say to you in the future, they'll say, well, by abstaining, Dad, you made that happen. And the other thing that you didn't vote for would have been infinite. I'd much rather be a rule taker, not a rule maker, yada, 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 than be eating chlorinated chicken in Liam Fox's fantasies. There you go. So you can't abstain.
It's a really difficult one, to be honest. And
if we vote against, if we all vote against the withdrawal agreement, what becomes more likely? No deal or no Brexit?
Well, no Brexit. No deal, sorry.
Well, are you sure? Because I'm not even sure about that anymore. I'm not sure about anything.
I can't see. I'm thinking of yourself, or it might have been someone else I was listening to a while ago.
Yes.
And they were basically saying, so excuse me if it was yourself, that they think that Theresa May is basically willing to put party before country, as you're probably aware of anyway.
Yes.
And this includes no deal. She's happy to sacrifice the country for her own party. I don't think she is going to cancel Brexit. There seems to be this sort of fervour about it.
No, but she will throw the choice away. She may throw it back to the people. You make a lot of sense. You really do. I think the one point you miss in your analysis of Theresa May is something that astonishes, and I know it's getting very tiresome, my I told you so addiction, but it's been pretty astonishing to see both Norman Baker, who was in the Home Office with her, and Anna Soubry, who was in government with her, endorse my analysis of Theresa May's behaviour over the last 2 years. It only makes sense if you see her as a middle-class, pearl-clutching xenophobe. The only thing that makes sense of everything Theresa May has done since becoming Prime Minister would be a belief that freedom of movement of people, whether they're economic contributors to the country or not, is a bad thing. And that, of course, means how she can still see it as a win if they abolish free movement and throw the rest of the country's health and security under the proverbial bus. A little bit more on this. I really, really like it. Are Remainers going to end up cleaning up after the hard Brexiters? And we're having an interesting conversation, more of a dance than perhaps many of our Brexit subjects, our Brexit questions have been, because it's very hard to talk about sides anymore, and yet the British media is still talking about sides. An awful lot of Leave voters are still talking about you lost or we won. Or, to be honest, if we ended up with no deal, nobody would have won. Nobody voted for that. And yet, of course, the effort that's put into pretending that they knew all along that this was going to happen is part of the reason why things have ended up in such an almighty mess. So what would you say to my cautious suggestion that for a moderate Member of Parliament who voted either Leave or Remain, the national interest might be best served by voting for Theresa May's withdrawal agreement, because the priority now is protecting the country from people like Andrew Bridgen and Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Dominic Raab. We have had fairly incontrovertible evidence that they either do not understand what they're talking about or they do not care about the destruction of industry and agriculture. And we heard the American ambassador endorsing the latter view this weekend, as many of us have predicted he would do. So the national interest would be served best by moderate MPs, sensible MPs, regardless of how they voted in the referendum, backing the withdrawal agreement, because the alternative is giving the steering wheel to people like Andrew Bridgen. And do you know, as I say those words out loud, I'm almost talking myself out of my own support for the idea. Since when did we start doing things in the British Parliament, the sovereign British Parliament, because we were frightened of nutters? Tony's in Windsor. Tony, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I would say I was a moderate Leave voter, and I couldn't understand why we wouldn't have stayed in the single market. And I know you've gone over it, the immigration thing.
Yeah.
I thought it would be madness to quit, and we would have solved so many issues now.
You must have. Let's not do a post-mortem, but you must have. I mean, you remember that disgusting poster, the Breaking Point poster. You must have realised that after winning, there was no earthly way that whoever was charged with delivering Brexit was going to be able to row back on the immigration rhetoric, didn't you?
The mistake May made right at the outset was she should have looked at the vote, 52-48, and crafted a Brexit round that. But you can't go over that now. You can't row back on it.
No, you're right, you can't. And you know what I say at this point is that Paul Dacre would not have let her. Actually, one of the interesting things in my interview podcast with Tony Blair is the stuff about the Daily Mail and getting into bed with Paul Dacre. But as you say, we can't go back on that now. So we are where we are. What do you reckon?
Well, what I can't understand is for quite a few years near where I live, Farage and Daniel Hannan have visited the area, Ascot, Windsor, Slough, all around. And for years and years and years, they've always talked about Norway.
Yes.
We stay in the single market, but we pull away politically, make our own trade deals, da-da-da-da-da.
Yes.
And that's what they've gone on and on and on about for probably a decade. And then I don't know what's happened to some of the people.
Well,
now.
I do, and you do as well, deep down. I won't say this about Daniel Hannan, because I think he still deserves the benefit of the doubt, but the other fella will just say whatever gets him to the end of the beginning of the next fag break. He doesn't care whether it's true or not. It's all about getting his face on the telly. It's all about getting self-promotion and getting radio shows and stuff like that. He said many times that we could be like Norway without saying to people that would involve freedom of movement remaining. Just like now he claims that the Article 24 of GATT can somehow solve a problem that everybody knows it can't. But it doesn't matter, mate. He says it out loud. He gets away with it. He'll say it again tomorrow. You know that.
I mean, no major economy in the world trades on WTO. I mean, it's crazy.
No, but it doesn't matter, because if you wanted to... This is why it's interesting to hear you describe yourself as a moderate Leave voter, because you obviously don't need to believe as much as Farage's followers do. They've been lied to for 10 years, and they're still being lied to now. But the alternative is to turn around and admit that you've been lied to. No one wants to do that. I didn't fall for a lie. How dare you? GATT 24 will solve all our problems, and blue passports and fish.
The thing is that, I mean, I don't think I think there will be I think that May's deal will go through. And we're only talking about the withdrawal agreement, aren't we? We're not talking about... I think, to be quite honest, I think a lot of people...
Do you want it to go through? Sorry to interrupt you. Do you want it to go through?
Yeah.
Why? Because as a moderate leaver, this is your worst nightmare. This literally casts us as rule takers, not rule makers.
I don't think it will be the end game. I don't think it will be the end game. I think there'll be a lot to... So what are you holding
out for, Tony? What are you holding out? Because I sense you haven't flipped yet. You haven't come over to the other side of the argument. You still... And freedom of movement, obviously, is going to be a big fly in the ointment of this bit of the conversation. But what are you holding out for, then, if you say it won't be the end of it?
Where they made the mistake was we could have joined the EFTA countries. They've already got a trade deal. And although you can't stop immigration from other EU countries, you can put a brake on it, although it be temporary.
Yeah, but you don't need to leave the EU to do any of that.
No, and there's other mechanisms. But it also, you can't... I mean, as each month has gone on, you can just see that it's just chaos, heaped on chaos, heaped on chaos, heaped on chaos.
And when I say, and it must be incredibly irritating, but when I say to you, well, I told you, it was obviously this was going to happen. It's been obvious for at least 18 months. Why are you surprised, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I think... Yeah, it's like saying to somebody, build me an extension, which is a good idea, but getting cowboy builders round.
Yeah, again, I'm going to disagree with you on that, because I saw the plans, and I knew that extension was rubbish before you hired any builders.
Well, if we... my own view is, if we could have taken the middle ground and stayed in the European Economic Area, which is what Ken Clark has said on numerous occasions, we could have had our cake and eaten.
But no, we couldn't have done, because Ken Clark only says that because he still feels you have to in some way respect the result of that referendum. If Ken Clark was in charge, if you made him emperor, we'd stay in the European Union. So it's not cake and eat it. I just sense, and don't take offence, you're not quite ready yet to admit that it could never have gone well.
No, it could have.
See?
I think it became evident fairly early on.
Yes.
That many of the high-profile people involved with it didn't really have a clue what they were talking about.
No, it certainly... Well, it became evident to you and to me.
Yes. It's a massive disappointment for me and quite a few other people who sort of thought about this for quite a long time and thought, there's no way they're ever going to leave the single market. That's madness.
But this is... I mean, I could talk to you all day, you know, Tony, because you're conducting a conversation about Brexit as if immigration had nothing to do with it. You could not have won without mobilising the racist vote. You could not have won without mobilising the concerned about immigration because I believe lies in the newspapers, even though I'm not actually a racist vote. You couldn't have got close to getting over the line without the support of the vilest members of our society, certainly the vilest members of our political class and our media class. They were all despicable and disgusting, and they all got you over the line. So for you to get over the line and then say, well, I never thought that freedom of movement was going to be an issue, I don't quite get that, Tony.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is that I know I go back to some of the old, but I was a long time ago in the early 2000s a member of UKIP.
Okay.
Well,
you've not always been that relaxed about immigration, then, have you? That was all UKIP was for.
But it was never spoken about at any of the meetings. And the route out was always, and until probably about a year or two ago, join EFTA, we can be like Norway.
No, you're ducking my question. I'm not going to hit you over the head with it. I hear you, and you're a good faith actor. And I think I'm going to stand by my unkind conclusion that you're just not quite ready to go all the way yet and say that you made a terrible mistake. Because there's no earthly way any of the things you thought that you wanted could have been delivered without... Well, you wouldn't have got over the line without mobilising the racist vote, and once the racist vote was mobilised, you couldn't do anything unless you dealt with the immigration issue. I think you're right. I think Theresa May was wrong to do that. I think the stupidest thing she did was that Citizens of Nowhere speech. But it turns out she was actually a racist all along, which I didn't really know, and I should have done. I was on the job, as it were, while she was Home Secretary. And if you could look at those vans and the hostile environment and what happened under her, what's the lies about the cat, the lies about Abu Qatada, but barefaced lies designed to throw red meat to racists as Home Secretary. So why on earth are we surprised? But I'll say it again. You're a good lad. You're not quite there yet. Glenn's in Leicester. Glenn, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, Glenn.
I was a Leave voter. I voted to leave on the basis of the reasons I wanted to leave.
Yes.
But now with Theresa May's deal, it's not the deal that I voted for in terms of leaving. And based on that deal, if given the chance again now, I would remain, because I'd rather remain with full benefits than this half-cocked piece of rubbish that they put in front of it.
Well, you say that. I mean, you could describe it as we retain almost all of the benefits. We just don't have any say in setting them for the future. I don't know how robust you're feeling, but you have, I think, just ticked the box I described earlier as we will remain and pretend for the rest of our lives that things could somehow have gone differently.
Yeah, I just don't see it as if you're going to be in part of something, you are part of it.
But you voted to leave it, so what?
I voted to leave it.
But what did you think was going to happen?
That we would go under World Trade Organisation rules.
Mate. You never thought, Glenn, come off it. In June of 2016, you thought we were going to be the only country on the planet that was trading exclusively on World Trade Organisation rules, which, first of all, we have to ask permission from every other member of the WTO first. Glenn, mate, do me a favour.
Well,
I do know, and you know. You didn't. Let me read you something from the 9th of October. No, the 9th of October 2016. So just weeks after the vote. All right. This is, forgive me, Glenn, this is why you voted leave. I'm not suggesting you're a Sun reader necessarily, but I'm suggesting that this sort of rhetoric was so embedded in the public consciousness, it turned us all upside down. Ever since we voted for Brexit, there's been a non-stop series of threats from the likes of France and Germany. If we dare to take back control of our borders, they say they'll push us out of the single market. So even in October of 2016, the Sun was lying to its readers about the inevitability of removing ourselves from the free movement of people, entailing a removal of ourselves from the free movement of goods and services. And that's why you voted leave, because you didn't realise that was hogwash.
Didn't vote on the basis of protecting our borders.
What did you vote for, then?
Voted on the basis of being in control of our laws.
Right.
Being in control of everything we do.
And how do we... What input do we have into setting World Trading Organisation terms? Are we in control of...
It's part of it.
Are we in control of them?
I'd like to be in control of when we take people in from India.
Well, that's borders, mate. We're back to borders.
Yeah, but not to be isolated to just what the EU say.
But we're not. We've got higher immigration from non-EU countries than we have from EU countries.
Yeah, but we've got all the rules around from the EU.
No, we haven't. There's no EU rules regarding immigration from non-EU countries. We can have identical rules if we wanted. But anyway, just because, because I have to, mate, and I derive no pleasure from this. You said you voted leave to take back control of our laws, and I will ask you for the final time what we do to set up the WTO terms that you said you voted for. How do we control those, Glenn?
I'm bamboozled with the whole situation.
Bless you, mate. not mentioning this for any particular reason. Astonishing piece in the New York Times. They call him failing grayling. He has bumbled his way from one government post to another, accused of making a hash of each and becoming a byword for haplessness in a golden age of political blundering in Britain. So reports the New York Times this morning. It's astonishing. I'm not suggesting that the New York Times is infallible when it comes to picking up on and properly reporting the most significant players on the British political stage, but they've got Chris Grayling banged to rights. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. Listen to this, all right? This is from Incorrigible FCA, who, frankly, someone should be paying him for the quality of his research and archiving, because this is really important. I don't know how you voted, okay, in the referendum. But I do know that on the 9th of October 2016, so weeks after the result came in, the Sun newspaper was saying this, in an editorial, in an op-ed, okay? Bearing in mind that the Sun newspaper is where people like Jacob Rees-Mogg go when they want to inflate their latest nonsense. In fact, so ridiculous has that relationship become that the Sun have withdrawn claims they made about tariffs and so-called no-deal Brexit, while Rees-Mogg failed to do so. But here, just listen to this. This is so interesting. And all of the calls I could take if I'd ask you a slightly different question, all of the callers you'll hear on LBC at other parts of the day saying that they knew this and they knew that and they never voted for that and they never voted for this, it's all nonsense. This is what the Sun was saying in the second week of October 2016. OK, and I'm going to read you the whole thing because it's so interesting. Ever since we voted for Brexit, there's been a non-stop series of threats from the likes of France and Germany. If we dare to take back control of our borders, they say they'll push us out of the single market. Most of it is just hot air, since they export far more to us than we do to them. If they slapped tariffs on us and started a trade war, they'd be the main losers. But there's another aspect to this that makes their threats even more limp. Up to 30 of the countries that have done trade deals with the EU have already pointed out to Brussels that their agreements were made with a single market that included the UK. And it was our presence in the single market that was one of the main lures in making a deal. If the EU forced us out of the single market in a fit of pique, then those countries would consider their own agreements with the EU void. As one put it, if you punish Britain, we will punish you. The Remainers and Brussels want us to think we made a terrible mistake and the cards are all stacked in their favour. We didn't, and they're not. So in October 2016, the Sun was arguing that we would be able to retain single market membership despite abolishing freedom of movement of people. They have been proved categorically and completely wrong about that. Not only have they been proved wrong about that, they've been proved so definitively wrong that I would not hesitate to describe whoever wrote this as a barefaced liar. The editor of The Sun, Tony Gallagher, is still in post, despite having lied to his readers on a scale that will damage their futures, their children's futures, and their security. But Rupert Murdoch likes him, so he's still there. That is astonishing, because this line here about up to 30 of the countries that have done trade deals with the EU have already pointed out to Brussels that their agreements were made with a single market that included the UK. Have a look at what the Japanese and Singaporean governments have to say about their recently concocted trade deals with the European Union. Find me the bit where it says, if you punish Britain, we will punish you. What is happening with regard to Brexit is inevitable and was predicted. They will not separate the four freedoms. And yet, journalists like Tony Gallagher, the editor of The Sun, can lie through their teeth to the British people and still be in post nearly 3 years later. 2.5 years after publishing that op-ed, he's still there. It's been proven wrong on every single syllable, every scintilla of meaning in that op-ed is wrong. The Remainers and Brussels want us to think we made a terrible mistake and the cards are all stacked in their favour. We didn't and they're not. In other words, what the Sun write there is that if it turns out that the European Union won't dilute their four freedoms, if it turns out that we can't actually abolish freedom of movement of people while remaining in the single market for everything else, if that turns out to be true, according to this Sun op-ed, then we would have made a terrible mistake. It has now turned out to be true. So where is Tony Gallagher's op-ed explaining that they did make a terrible mistake and they're very, very sorry? Listen, that line there, this is crucial. The Remainers and Brussels want us to think we made a terrible mistake and the cards are all stacked in their favour. That is the penultimate paragraph of an op-ed that argues we will be able to abolish freedom of movement of people and retain membership of the single market for movement of goods and services and money. That has been proven to be false. So what the Sun described in October of 2016 as a terrible mistake has now come to pass. But if you're waiting for any of the architects of this debacle to admit that they made a terrible mistake, even though they wrote it down themselves in October of 2016, my advice to you would be not to hold your breath. Adrian is in Nantes in France. Adrian, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with your general premise that remaining in the single market is not compatible with better controlling or perhaps even ending freedom of movement.
No. That's not what I said. You can stay in the single market while observing the European Union's rules for movement of people, which are a hell of a lot more robust than anybody realised in the run-up to the referendum.
Well, let's look at the law. The freedom of movement arises from two distinct bodies of jurisprudence. The first is the Treaty of Rome, and that is replicated to a degree, although not completely, in the European Economic Area Agreement. And the European Economic Area Agreement gives member states outside of the European Union who remain within membership of the single market, i.e. the FTA3.
Yeah, no, I'm not. We're not.
Let me finish.
Well, I'm agreeing with you. I just want to move on to the questions that I'm actually asking. If we stay within the EEA, that would involve retaining the freedom of movement rules under which European Union members abide. So I promise you, I'm not.
I disagree.
Okay.
There are greater powers. This may not have ever been explained to you. I suspect it probably has, but you simply don't believe it.
Oh, okay.
But the European Economic Area Agreement gives greater powers to non-European Union member states of the single market than it does to European Union members, because the European Union members, first of all, are subject to anti-discrimination and equality legislation that the FTA3 are not subject to, although there are some overlaps. But the main point is, as Liechtenstein has proved, is that if you can demonstrate that you have a significant social or economic problem that is arising as a result of any one of the four freedoms, and incidentally Iceland have also suspended free movement of capital, there is a reason for you to implement controls on freedom of movement. Now, those controls can be implemented unilaterally by the member state themselves, i.e. Great Britain could remain in the single market by remaining a member of the European Economic Area Agreement, and could decide to pull what's called the emergency handbrake, although that's not how the statute itself describes it.
But it's not.
Control from
I apologise for interrupting you when you're in your prime, but it's not a unilateral decision that we would take, is it? It's something that we would apply for.
Yes, if you read, I can read to you the statute. Article 112 states that it's a unilateral.
I don't understand, Adrian. Forgive me. I don't understand the point that you think that you're making, and I apologise that the conversation has become combative in the first place. The question I'm asking is, if you had a free vote in the House of Commons, would you vote for a withdrawal agreement, even though you recognise that it is, by the analysis of everybody from Boris Johnson to Joe Johnson, is inferior to membership of the European Union?
Well, I wouldn't vote for this particular agreement that Theresa May.
But it's the only one. It's the only one you're going to get the chance to vote on.
But it isn't, because Michel Barnier and the European Union have repeatedly made the offer for the UK to remain full members of the European Economic Area Agreement, which means when you contrast that offer, which was ruled out by Theresa May because of her misunderstanding of the red line.
Ah, okay. So it's me and Theresa May that misunderstand the freedom of movement legislation.
I'm afraid you do, yeah.
No, that's fine.
If you let me finish,
mate, you've already taken us up to past. I'm not arguing with anything you've said. The way in which you can accommodate a belief that things could have gone better is by Adrian explaining to us that the freedom of movement legislation has been misunderstood by everybody except him.
I encourage you to read Article 112 and find the word in it that says...
I shall, and I will, and I look forward to it. In the meantime, your answer to the questions that I'm asking today is...
no, I wouldn't vote for this agreement. I would say that we should reject this agreement but stay in the single market, and the single market could be... And
everybody says we can't do that, but they all need to read Article 112... was it the Treaty of Rome?
Liechtenstein is a point in case of a non-European Union...
Again, you think you're arguing with me. I make no claims to knowing everything and understanding everything. I get a little bit suspicious when, with 24 days to go, people ring me and say, I actually understand this better than all of the major players, and there is an alternative that nobody's spoken about that would be better than what we've currently got. But, mate, after 2.5 years of this, there's no earthly way I'm going to say that you're wrong. I'm going to go away and look into it a little bit more. And next time we speak, let's just try and keep it a little bit friendlier. Because you're welcome to finish and you're welcome to speak, but I then have to do this, you see. It's a weird one, this, because we are looking for the middle ground at a time when many people persist in arguing that it doesn't actually exist. I apologise for harping on, but that Sun op-ed is so illustrative of the mess that we've ended up in. The Sun arguing that if things were really as they were described in October of 2016, then it would be a terrible mistake to have left the European Union. And they claim that things weren't like that at all. And now they are. But, of course, the Sun has tripled down. The previous caller, Adrian in Nantes in France, I think was endorsing the theories put forward by Richard North, who is actually a very interesting contributor to this debate. So if you want to find out more about what Adrian was talking about, look that up. I don't understand the full extent of that theory, because I think you have to prove exceptional circumstances. I think that's what the Liechtenstein model does. And if you prove exceptional circumstances, you get a temporary break upon some of the requirements of the four freedoms. But that would involve being both exceptional and temporary, which seems to me to be not properly addressing the questions that we're asking. But again, as I stress, I could be wrong. Maybe there is an EEA answer that allows us to temporarily have different border rules to the rest of the EEA and retain access to the single market. But as Adrian pointed out, that's not on the table in the House of Commons. What is on the table now is May's deal or no deal. Brackets or no Brexit. But under the law, unless the government specifically, or Parliament actually, specifically does something, we crash out with no deal on, what is it today, the 4th? 25 days from now. That's it. Boom, gone. A scenario which, under the government's own forecasts and analysis, would see a 9% decline in our own economy. And that's what's going to happen in 25 days. How have we ended up in such a mess? I think that Times editorial is really helpful. We've ended up in such a mess because the major news outlets, the major spokespeople for this issue, particularly from the Leave side, have argued the polar opposite of their own position. And you wonder why everything is so confused and stagnated. I can't believe that Sun thing, actually. I've had to triple-check that it's real, because, it fits into the analysis so perfectly. The Sun described what has happened as a terrible mistake, but they described it as a terrible mistake at a time when they were denying that it was going to happen. So if you were an MP and you had a free vote, would you vote for the withdrawal agreement? And it's been a very interesting mixture of people who were in favour of leave, who would vote for the withdrawal agreement because they were never in favour of no deal, and people who actually voted Remain would be in favour of the withdrawal agreement because the prospect of no deal is so chilling. But I'd remind you that the Conservative Party membership is cool with no deal. I know that it's a little rude to say they clearly don't know what it means, but they clearly don't know what it means. That doesn't matter, as the referendum demonstrated to us. A vote from someone who understands nothing is worth exactly the same as a vote from someone who understands everything. We're still reaping what we sowed that day and will be doing for generations. But in the context of where we are now, I think Theresa May's got a much better chance than we gave her a month ago. I think her constant postponements are looking like tactics rather than desperation. And while we use this phrase, running the clock down, it could be a little subtler than that. She is running the clock down, but she's doing more than running the clock down. She's boxing the ERG into a corner from which they may never escape. I don't know. As I said, from the beginning of this year onwards, I don't know what happens. I don't know what unfolds. And that's terrifying. Valerie is in Seven Sisters. Valerie, what do you think?
Well, I'm riddled with stage fright at the moment.
Oh, it's only me.
I'm hoping I can hang on to my thread.
You'll be fine.
If I were this MP, I would not be voting for the withdrawal plan, but I would be it's like a huge gamble, isn't it, James?
Yes.
Because I want to remain, because I can see what a disaster it is for our country. And so I wouldn't vote for the plan, because all the politicians are assuring me that, well, not as an MP, but as me, Valerie,
yes.
They're assuring me that they won't allow a no deal. Can I believe them? Is that right?
But are they, though? I don't think Theresa May is. She hasn't ruled it out, has she? And she is in charge, ostensibly.
Yes, true. But I'm talking about the politicians I respect. But no, I keep hearing this. The House won't allow a no deal. So then I'm hoping that we'll go for a second referendum or a people's vote. But if we go for the people's vote, is that going to cause division among the country?
Well, we can't get any more divided. So while I don't welcome continuing division, I think the argument that things could get worse than they were on the day that disgusting poster was unveiled and Joe Cox got murdered is sadly ridiculous. Things can't get any worse than that because, we've reached a form of critical mass. Of course, more pertinently, it could go the way you don't want it to go. There could be a second referendum and leave... Despite the fact that all the promises they made the first time round have either been unveiled as false or exaggerated, they could win again because they've got the tools on their side. And it's always easier to sell tickets for the ghost train than it is for the speak your weight machine.
Exactly. And that's what I'm thinking as this politician. I want to remain. So it's a gamble. If we get a referendum and we actually lost again, then I've got nothing to do except hold my hands up, roll over and take it, because they've got all the facts in front of them,
yes.
The leavers. They now know all the horrors that are in store for us. I don't have to outline them any more than you have done, James, in your last 2 years. And if this is where they want to go, if they want to take our country to hell in a handcart, I just got to roll with it, I suppose. I don't know. Go somewhere else? I don't know.
No, I don't know either. But the withdrawal agreement, in the absence of any way of having two trade zones in Ireland, on the island of Ireland, in the absence of having two different regulatory frameworks operating on the same land mass, but somehow being able to check the passage from one framework to the other without having any checks, until they come up with that solution, we essentially stay as we are, but without any say over the future rules and regulations. That's got to be better than crashing out with no deal, but it's so demonstrably worse than remaining that you can't quite bring yourself to go along with it.
But I find it also impossible to go along with it because I can see the barefaced manipulation that I'm being subjected to. And it's angering me. It's making me so angry.
But that Sun editorial is so pertinent, isn't it? They're actually describing what is now reality as a terrible mistake, but 2.5 years ago poo-pooing it as Project Fear and exaggeration.
Don't get me started on that.
No, well, we can't reason with it. And we really can't. So you've got, you really are, it's not even Hobson's choice. You hate all of the options that are open to you, except the promised land of a second referendum in the hope that it delivers a Remain result, but you're not massively optimistic about either of those coming to pass.
I'm not. I'm saying I'm not a gambler.
No.
But I feel that this is a gamble, and I don't want to be coerced into this agreeing with this withdrawal plan by the likes of ERG. I do not want the ERG to have any say on my life whatsoever. I am absolutely disgusted by people who are prepared to make themselves even more wealthy than they already are at the expense of our country and our future. They're taking care of their dynasties by they're gambling too.
Yes.
But they're gambling with hard money. I'm not. I'm gambling with...
Well, no, you're not. You're gambling with all the intangibles, oddly. I mean, apart from the economic ones, security, safety, freedom, all of these things. Speaking of which, I've got the article that Adrian referred to, Article 112. If serious economic, societal or environmental difficulties of a sectorial or regional nature liable to persist are arising, a contracting party may unilaterally take appropriate measures under the conditions and procedures laid down in Article 113. I think this is the right one. And then Article 113 tells us that the safeguard measure. So if you have, I don't know whether you have to prove it or how you would prove that you have economic, societal or environmental difficulties as a result of obeying the rules. But if you can, then you get to not have to obey them for a while. And the safeguard measures taken shall be the subject of consultations in the EEA Joint Committee every 3 months from the date of their adoption, with a view to their abolition before the date of expiry envisaged or to the limitation of their scope or application. So both temporary and applicable only in exceptional circumstances, and, of course, subject to 3-month consultations with the EEA Joint Committee. So there's something there, but it's not quite the taking back control that that people were promised. And you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've retweeted that Sun op-ed. It is breathtaking. Paper that now says everyone knew what they were voting for in October 2016. Angry that the UK might be forced out of the single market by the French and the Germans. My regular correspondent, I Am Incorrigible, sent it to me. I have retweeted it from my account so that you can see it. And I've also retweeted the Article 112, the whole of that document that the previous caller from Nantes, Adrian, was referring to in the context of how, under special circumstances, we could exempt ourselves as EEA members from the full requirements of freedom of movement of people rules. It's interesting. I don't think it says what he said it said, but I've only just read it. He's read it a lot more than I have, so maybe there is a little bit more to it than initially meets the eye. It's certainly a lot more substantive than the guff about Article 24 of GATT that liars and snake oil salespeople are still pretending to believe offers up a meaningful path for us to exit without a deal. John's in Armagh in Northern Ireland, appropriately enough. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, mate. I'm sorry, I missed the article in the Sun. I don't read Lou paper, so that passed me by.
Carry on.
I think your argument's flawed with regards what to vote for. I couldn't stand the smugness. I think we'd all have to. I think we'd vote for an extension. I think most people would, because it's the thing where there's time, there's hope. And after if we go on the 29th, well, that's it. We're gone. So go for an extension, and then what we need to try and do then is, if need be, go for a general election and try that we end up.
But what if it doesn't happen? Eh? We've got 25 days. After which, if nothing happens at parliamentary level, at legislative level, we crash out without a deal. And only the biggest. I'm running out of rude words that I'm allowed to say on the radio, but only the biggest throbbers known to man would be arguing now that is what they voted for. We actually voted for this. It's an astonishing effort in delusion and psychological self-manipulation, but it would still happen, mate.
Well, I know. I mean, I never voted for it, and surely we've got 3 days, haven't we? Is it that what the 11th, 12th, and 13th, or 3rd and 12th? Anyway, those 3 days next week. Correct me if I'm wrong, but amendments can be put through, and I mean, a lot of pressure is going to be on the Speaker, whether or not what way he allows through.
Yes, but there's no guarantee that you've got Caroline Flint's talking about 70 Labour MPs who would vote against having a second referendum. So I think the best, perhaps, that could happen next week would be an extension of Article 50, but that arguably creates more problems than it solves. Because do we put candidates up in the European Union elections?
It gives us time. It gives us time.
It doesn't. It gives us 3 months.
Well, no. It gives you shoulder room. It gives people to come to listen. It doesn't matter what Caroline Flint says. You see, if you get another movement to the Tiggers, Tiggers,
is that what we're calling them? Excellent. I didn't know that. I like that. So Tiggers. Yeah. Positive.
Yeah. So I think when when that happens, I think there'll be a change of heart there, and I think that the red mist will start to dissipate, and I think people will start to get a touch of reality.
Bless you.
Oh, by the way, can I just say,
no.
I enjoyed your link, I don't know what it was meant, between Firestarter and burning the houses down to give a gap. That was a very nice link.
Subconscious. It was unintentional, but it was probably there, burrowing away into my subconscious. I kind of want to be closer to the what you'd call the really clear-eyed Remain argument, that we would be insane to contemplate doing anything other than fighting until our dying breath to retain what we currently have. And you'd think, this is why I'm not as optimistic as John about the red mist dissipating, because this weekend you literally had the American ambassador trying to sell us chlorinated chicken and slagging off our entire farming industry, calling it a museum piece. If you're a patriot, if you care about farmers, and if you resent the idea of foreign unelected bureaucrats meddling in our affairs, you should have been spitting nails at the intervention of the American ambassador. He's a foreign unelected bureaucrat meddling in our affairs. He's slagging off British farming and suggesting that it needs to be replaced by the imported chlorinated chicken that American industrial farmers are desperate to sell us, and he's foreign, and he's also foreign. So when you think back to how Barack Obama's intervention was greeted in the run-up to the referendum result, you're going to have to come up with a very subtle explanation of why Barack Obama, describing in good faith what he believed a Leave vote would deliver, is somehow anathema. And you can't ask me this, because I'm happy to listen to both of them. I just think one of them talks sense and one of them talks up the interests of sinister American commercial concerns, i.e. the people that want to flog you chlorinated chicken. So that's why I don't think the red mist is going to dissipate, because they're not going to get angry with a foreign unelected bureaucrat slagging off British farmers, which means all the things they claimed they cared about, like unelected foreign bureaucrats meddling in our affairs, like British agriculture, like British business, they don't care about any of those things at all. You find me a Brexiter now, still saluting the Brexit flag, they won't be able to tell you what they believe in anymore. They'll just tell you that it has to happen. They gave up months ago waiting for them to actually describe benefits or laws that they don't want to obey or any of those things. They won't be able to tell you what they actually believe in. And the diabolical genius of the Sun editor is that he understands that. He knows that he can write in October 2016 that if events as they are now transpire, that would all be a horrible mistake. But by the time those events actually transpire, he can be claiming that you voted for what he called a horrible mistake in October of 2016. And what breaks my heart? What breaks my heart is they're so good at it. Nobody in the British tabloid media has ever suffered from overestimating their readership. Treat them like thick scumbags, and they will behave like thick scumbags. I refuse. I will always treat them like intelligent, open-minded, potentially enlightened people. But I'm losing. David's in Earl's Court. David, what would you like to say?
Well, I just wanted to say, when you began the conversation about if you were sitting in Parliament,
yes.
What you would vote for, it's ironic because over the last couple of weeks, even though I'm passionately, like you, for remaining and keeping the benefits that we have been thinking, well, God damn it, we're getting towards the end of all of this. If we got to go for something, if it's going to be a choice between, crashing out with no deal and going with May's agreement that at least gives us some sort of I don't know what you would want to call it. I was about to say like a pillow to land on, but it's not even that really. We'll land with less of a bump than just crashing out and going over a cliff. That I would rather have, if that was the only choice presented to me, that's what I would probably vote for. And it makes me sick to say it because...
But that is how it feels, and that's her plan, is to make it look like that's the only choice you have, which is why the absence of any rallying point for a second referendum will remain, and you have to lay responsibility for that at the feet of the Labour Party, rightly or... fairly, you have to. It is fair. It's not unfair. You could argue that they've had no choice but to pursue this position, which is a valid point. But the absence of a rallying point for a third option, so no deal, May's deal, third option, which is no Brexit or people's vote, that just doesn't seem to have despite the best efforts of the Tiggers, it doesn't have a constituency at the moment, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have... The other thing is there's no strong leadership. I'm not quite sure if Corbyn would present that kind of leadership, because a lot of people, both within his own party, don't even agree with him. But there's no kind of. You could say like somebody like Tony Blair, but he's so tainted by his own administration. Nobody wants to.
I put that precise question to him on Friday, a podcast that's gone live today. I said, "How do you personally process the knowledge that, however pertinent or accurate or correct your comments might be on any given subject, in this case Brexit, for a significant swathe of the population, they are not going to give you the time of day because of the legacy of the aftermath of the defeat of Saddam Hussein." And his answer, sorry to hijack your call to flog another one of my myriad projects, but his answer was fascinating. It's the most human I've ever seen him. There's a vulnerability there when he spoke about that, and when he spoke about, or I asked him whether it was all his fault. I said, if you hadn't miscalculated so hugely the number of people that would want to come here from the newly acceded Eastern European states, then Brexit would not be happening. And there was a humanity in his responses to those. You could see it. That's why I'm glad we filmed it. You'll enjoy that, David. But otherwise, yeah, I get it. You're thinking of it in terms of damage limitation. But that's because you're a Ramona and you're constantly thinking about what might be best for everybody instead of what might best feed your own warped psychodrama. And that's it from me for another day. We'll do it again tomorrow from 10.